Today I'd like to talk to you about a topic I call the Clover Dilemma. Do I have enough clover to withhold nitrogen from my mixed pastures, my grass legume pastures? First of all, there's nothing not to like about clovers or legumes. They give us better forage quality, they give us better animal gains, they reduce our fescue endophyte issues. They extend the grazing season over grass alone, and by that I usually mean that they add extra production in the summer when our cool season grasses tend to be less productive. And the one topic that we will focus in on for a good bit of this presentation is that clovers or legumes will reduce nitrogen fertilizer costs because those legumes fix their own nitrogen from the atmosphere. There are even more reasons to love red clover than the ones I just talked to you about. And it's a compound that's present in red clover called isoflavone, or the isoflavones. This is recent research coming out of the USDA unit here in Lexington, Kentucky. We call it the FAPRU, the Food Animal Production Research Unit. Isoflavones are compounds that are especially high in red clover. The one in particular we're talking about is biocanon A. Isoflavones are also present in white clover. Isoflavones, when they are ingested by the ruminant, they mimic the effect of rumensin or bovatec in the rumen, and that is they change the fermentation characteristics. There's less deamination of proteins and more bypass protein, which results in better performance. And the real biggie is that isoflavones directly counteract the vasoconstriction caused by toxic endophyte tall fescue. So if we want to talk about high yields of red clover, we understand their benefits. But let's talk about the ways that we're going to get those high yields. And the high yields start with a good variety. And I want to make you aware of at least one source of variety test information. If you will search in your browser for forages UKY, you'll come up with our forage extension home here at the University of Kentucky. And if you look down in the bottom center of your screen, you'll see the icon for the variety trials. If you click that icon, this is what you will see. You will see all of the variety tests that are currently reported on our website, and at the bottom of the page there will be an archive setting that you can go to if you want to look at past reports. Kentucky has one of the most extensive variety testing programs in the country. So if you're looking for a source of information about varieties, this is a good place to start. The publication I'd send you to first is this one. It's our UKPR, or Progress Report 792, the long-term summary of Kentucky forage variety trials. And in this one publication, you can find a summary of about 28 different species or types of trials that we run here at the University of Kentucky, going back in some cases 15 and 20 years. But I want to focus on one piece of research that we did. Now it's getting to be quite a little while ago, and you can tell because that's me in the picture. And at that time, I actually had some hair. So and frankly, I was at a meeting with producers, and I had presented our brand new results from our variety testing program on the better varieties and what they were and how well they produced. And after the meeting, a producer came up to me after most everybody had begun to leave and asked me, what difference does it really make if I plant some of your better varieties? And I asked him what he meant, and he said, well, common medium red at the co-op is only $1 a pound. What you're talking about, those varieties are $2 a pound. What's it really worth to seed those certified or improved varieties? Well, he stumped me. I know the textbook answer, that thou shalt seed certified seed of an improved variety. But in fact, what would happen if we put the common medium reds in trials? up against the certified varieties. And this is what you see. This is the spring of the third year for seeding in western Kentucky, where you can see that the common medium red is basically all gone, but we're going to get another good first cutting at least out of the certified variety to the right. To show you what the tables look like, or the data looks like, this is the data from that trial. Certified Kinland over 3 years produced 11.5 tons of dry matter. Cinnamon, which is was a good variety at the time at the end of the 1990s, produced statistically the same amount of forage. If you look down at the bottom, you can see that we had begun to put common medium reds in trials, and the difference between the commons and the best varieties in the trials were highly significant. If you do the math, the yield advantage of the improved red clover compared to commons or variety not stated, V&S, is 6,000 to 12,000 pounds more yield over the 3 years. You saw the picture of the persistence change in red clover. We lost the common medium reds by the third spring. The best varieties can give us 2 to 2.5 growing seasons. The worst varieties, the worst commons, can quit after just over 12 months. Certified Kinland is quite old. In fact, it's probably older than I am, but it still yields well, but it doesn't have the disease resistance of the new and improved red clover varieties. And this is just one example of powdery mildew attacking certified Kinland, but in the same trial, not cinnamon. Another point I want to make about achieving high clover yields or high legume yields is that you got to lime and fertilize. You got to grow the crop, and it's best to start with a soil test. And we want to start by liming that site to pH 6.4 or above for clover, and 6.8 or above or 6.8 or so for alfalfa. And these are Kentucky numbers. They may be slightly different there in wherever you are. And we want the phosphorus and the potassium in the medium to high range. But this costs money. So what kind of effect can you expect when you address the lime and fertilizer needs of a forage field? Well, I want to point you to this study, and it just points out one small part of the effect of fertilizing and doing what you need to do on a site. This is, before we started, it is a fescue field that had been encroached on by broom sedge. Over time, the producer had limed the field, so the pH was good, and he had been taking hay off of this field for a decade or more, and only fertilizing with a balanced fertilizer that put out the same amount of N, P, and K. So over time, it led to very low levels of soil potassium and low hay yields and broom sedge encroachment. So we put a trial out on that farmer's field to look at the effects of nitrogen, potassium, or nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. This is the overall effect on yield, and you can see that the no fertilizer had 1.6 tons per acre. Adding N and P gave us 2.8. When we addressed all three needs, we got 3.8. But really, the interesting thing I want you to see is that when we address the fertilizer needs, our broom sedge percentage in the first year dropped from 89% to 14%. But that's not even the best news. This site had not had clover added in 10 years, or more, actually. When we addressed the P and K needs and withheld nitrogen, we had a burst of red clover. And the two bars, the yellow bar, the lighter bar, is the clover in the first year, and the darker orange bar is the clover in the second year. And you can see that when we addressed or put the P, or phosphorus and potassium on that site, we saw 65% by ground cover clover volunteering in this grass pasture. The point I want to make is that if it'll do this good when no seed is added, just think how much better fertilizer and addressing your fertility needs will matter over when you add clover. So back to the topic, maximizing yields of grass clover stands, the Clover Dilemma. And I want to start on this part by looking at this table. And I would wager that you've seen this before. The nitrogen fixation by several different forage species in pounds per acre, which is the center column, and then the value of that nitrogen at 40 cents a pound, or pick some figure, on the right-hand column. And you can see that there are some pretty significant numbers there, up to 250 pounds of N fixed per acre per year in alfalfa, and that value can go, would be approaching $100 an acre. Now, I've just got a question. Is this data misleading, or what are your conclusions when you see data like this? I can honestly say that I would look at this data and think, well, then we should have, the grass should be growing great because alfalfa or red clover or white clover is fixing so much nitrogen that the grass must have some of it available to it. And actually, that's not quite correct, at least not fully. So, to restate the Clover Dilemma, do I have enough clover to withhold fertilizer in and maintain top yields? How does that nitrogen get from the clover to grass, and when? Now, if you've been in a forage extension discussion on clover and grass at all, very often, you've probably heard what figure we would quote or has been quoted for how much clover is enough. And you probably would find or hear or read in several extension publications that 25 to 30% clover is enough that you would not need to add fertilizer nitrogen. In fact, that's what our fertilizer recommendations say in Kentucky. But I've got a question. Is that on a weight basis or a ground cover basis? I'd like to take a look, a much closer look. I really have been stymied by this question over the years, and I decided I was really going to at least do my best to tease out an answer that I felt like would stand your scrutiny. And I found a dissertation published in 1981 by Dr. Chuck West while he was a student at the university, or at Iowa State University, and the title of it was Nitrogen Use Efficiency in Legume Grass Pastures. Chuck and Dr. Wedeen studied yields and nitrogen transfer in mature alfalfa grass pastures differing in their percent legume. These were 5th and 6th year alfalfa grass pastures that had an 11 to 55% average stand of alfalfa. And then the mean of the stands was 33%. So the range was 11 to 55. The average across all the fields was 33% alfalfa. And I want to spend a little bit of time on this table to really tease out what it says, because this is the table that really gave me the aha moment about grass clover interactions or grass legume interactions. If you look at the graph, you've got on the vertical axis dry matter yield and dry matter yield on the horizontal. So, and we're actually mapping out the two components. As the yields go up from 4 to 9, this would be tons per hectare. You'd have to divide by 2.2 to get tons per acre. As the yields go up, in other words, over the range of alfalfa percentages, and the alfalfa is the green box and the grass is the yellow colored area, then the yields go up from, then the alfalfa percent goes up from 11 to 55%, and the yields go up accordingly. The grass yields are almost constant over that full range of alfalfa. So what does this mean? It means a few things. It means that you get your increase in yield by increasing the percent legume. And over the range that we've got in this study, it was 11 to 55%. The yield increase that came from having the legume came from the legume itself. It did not come from the grass yielding more when you had more legume. If the legume was giving nitrogen directly to the grass, then you would have more grass yield as you had more alfalfa. Another thing that Dr. West found that is not shown in this graph that really nails this home is that the yield in a given year is best correlated to the percent legume the year before. Now think about that for a moment. What you're measuring right now, this year, or will measure this year, is really best correlated to the percent legume you had last year. So last year's legume has turned over in that pasture and has created nitrogen that's available for the grass this year. So my conclusion is there's little direct transfer from the legume to the grass. And in fact, Dr. West went on and, as a part of this study, did radioactive nitrogen isotope work to confirm that and to quantify the movement, direct movement of nitrogen from the legume to the grass. And there is a little, but it is not the very large of a quantity at all, in the neighborhood of 15 to 20 pounds per acre per year in this case. The grass benefits from nitrogen, but from nitrogen turned over in the manure and urine from animals consuming the legume the year before. So we've looked at Dr. West's study, and we had 11 to 55% alfalfa. The average across the whole study was 33%, and we saw that we had an increase in yield, total yield, as the alfalfa went all the way up to 55% in stand. I'd like to talk about another study. This one was conducted in Virginia by Karen Vines, where she looked at mixed stands with high percent legumes and found that they can yield like grass plus nitrogen. She had 3 systems: fescue plus nitrogen, 80 pounds applied twice a year, once in the spring and once in August, fescue plus red clover, and fescue plus alfalfa. The dry matter yields were equivalent with the nitrogen treatment and the red clover treatment, and actually the alfalfa yielded more than the fescue plus nitrogen alone. But let's look at the percent legumes that it took to do that. It took about 53% red clover in stand to equal the yield of tall fescue, and 59% alfalfa, and this is on a weight basis. So how much clover is enough? I think you can conclude by these 2 studies at least that we need at least the 30% and even more legume by weight year after year to maximize yields. Remember, it was the legume content the year before this year that correlated best to the dry matter yields of the pasture. Now, but I've got a question. What does 30 to 50% legume by weight look like? I want to refer you to this publication by Dr. Ed Rayburn and James Green, where they looked at or created a visual reference guide for estimating legume content in pastures. This is one example. This actually is 25% by weight. But if you were to estimate what that looks like visually, that looks almost like 75% on a visual basis. What they also found was that how long that clover has been in the stand matters. Now let's take a look at that. This is their data set. They had 2 sites represented by the green rectangles and the blue diamonds, or the dark blue diamonds. Site 1, the dark blue diamonds, was a newly seeded grass clover crop following row crops. Site 2 was a long-term stand of grass and clover. You got the relative dry matter yield going on the vertical axis, and the legume fraction is on the horizontal. Now I'd like to draw some lines to enable us to figure out how much clover it takes to maximize yield. For the established stand, the yields peak at 30% legume by weight. For the new stand, the yields continue to increase up until the highest percent legume present in that pasture. So for established stands, the yield plateaus at about 30% legume, which is the number we have used before. For new stand, yield keeps going up even to 80% legume. So what about choosing to use nitrogen on mixed stands? If you need the extra yield and want to use nitrogen on mixed stands, well, the research says that moderate rates of nitrogen in the spring can be used to boost yields, and the yields come by having more grass. The clover percentage in the studies recovered after the first harvest. Now, if it's the year of establishment, we don't need to add that extra nitrogen. Now, we do get into a bit of a tug of war when we need a lot of phosphorus and we have to use diammonium phosphate, or DAP, to get that needed phosphorus, because phosphorus is essential for clover to yield and alfalfa to yield. And finally, how does the nitrogen in the legume top growth move to the companion grass? Well, I borrowed this graphic from Dr. John Jennings in Arkansas because it shows this very well. We've got clover plants in the pasture being consumed by cows. You've got clover roots in the soil. You've got decayed tissue moving to the plants that can take up the nitrogen. You've got some direct transfer from the roots to the grass roots. So, and then you've got the cow consuming the clover, and that passing through her. So the number one way that nitrogen cycles in a pasture is through grazing. The number two way is from decay of dead roots and dead leaves that fall to the surface. And number three is from root contact or from fungi. So feeding the grass through the legume nitrogen takes time, and most nitrogen cycles through the grazing animal. Now, I want to use some numbers here, again, supplied by Dr. Jennings, that help us understand and quantify this nutrient cycling through manure and urine. 80 to 90% of the forage nitrogen is excreted in the manure and urine. 50% of the urinary nitrogen is lost through a process we call volatilization. And the pasture obviously is not completely covered with manure or urine spots. The research says about 14 to 22%. Now, obviously, rotational grazing can help us more evenly distribute manure and urine and keep it away from loafing areas and where we would tend to concentrate nutrients. So in continuous grazing and low stocking rates, more nitrogen is concentrated around the water source and the shade. Nitrogen distribution is improved in rotational grazing systems with higher stocking rates and shorter grazing duration. So in summary, mixed stands can have comparable yields to stands of grass plus nitrogen. The increase in yield in mixed stands comes from the legume. For high yields, we need 25 to 30% legume by weight year after year. And the number one pathway of nitrogen transfer from legumes to the grass is cycling through grazing livestock. Thank you very much.